were supposed to be the next generation, the future. Instead, they became murderers. Some killed for money, others for freedom. A few claimed voices in their heads, but all of them share one horrifying truth. They destroyed the people who gave them life. From hammer attacks in the night to elaborate plots for inheritance, these aren't just family tragedies. They're calculated acts of betrayal that shattered the most sacred bond. Let's begin. Case 1. Chandler Halderson, July 7th, 2021. Windsor, Wisconsin. Chandler Halderson called police to report his parents missing. Bart and Krista hadn't returned from their cabin, he claimed. He seemed concerned, cooperative. But detectives noticed something in his voice, a flatness, a rehearsed quality. They started digging, and what they found was a web of lies that had been years in the making. Chandler was 23 years old and still living at home. He told everyone he attended Madison Area Technical College and worked for American Family Insurance. He showed his parents fake report cards. He created elaborate stories about job offers and internships. None of it was real. When his parents started asking questions, wanting to attend his graduation ceremony to meet his employer, Chandler realized his fantasy world was collapsing. On July 1st, 2021, Bart confronted his son about the lies. Chandler's response was to retrieve a high-powered rifle and shoot his father in the back. When Krista came home, Chandler killed her too. Then came the cover-up. Chandler dismembered both bodies using saws and knives. He burned some remains in the family fireplace. He disposed of other parts in remote areas. Bart's torso was found by kayakers in the Wisconsin River. Krista's legs were discovered in a wooded area. During the investigation, Chandler continued lying, creating fake emails from his parents and searching online for how long it takes for bodies to decompose. On March 17, 2022, after a trial that horrified the nation, Chandler Halderson was convicted on all charges, including 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide, mutilating and hiding corpses, and providing false information. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As of January 2026, Chandler remains incarcerated at a Wisconsin correctional facility. He has served nearly 5 years. He's 28 years old and will die in prison. Case 2. Joel Michael Guy Jr. Thanksgiving 2016. Knoxville, Tennessee. Joel and Lisa Guy invited their eldest son home for the holiday. They had news to share. They were retiring to Louisiana and would no longer be providing financial support to their 28-year-old son. Joel Guy Jr. had been living off his parents for years, and the thought of having to support himself was unbearable. So he made a plan. On November 26th, the day after Thanksgiving, Joel Jr. attacked his father first, stabbing him at least 42 times. When his mother, Lisa, tried to intervene, he turned on her, stabbing her at least 31 times. But the killing wasn't enough for Joel Jr. He spent hours dismembering their bodies in the bathroom, cutting them into pieces. He attempted to dissolve the remains in acid, filling containers with body parts and chemicals. He set small fires throughout the house, hoping to destroy evidence. His investigators found handwritten notes detailing his plan, a murder blueprint that included lists of supplies needed and steps for body disposal. The notes revealed his cold calculation. He wanted to make his parents disappear so completely that their deaths wouldn't be discovered until he'd accessed their retirement accounts. A neighbor noticed smoke coming from the house and called emergency services. When firefighters arrived, they discovered a scene so horrific that several officers required counseling. Body parts were scattered in multiple rooms. The bathtub contained a gruesome mixture of human remains and chemicals. Joel Jr. had even taken breaks during the dismemberment to drink his father's beer and use the family computer. He was arrested shortly after fleeing the scene. At trial, prosecutors presented the handwritten notes, your forensic evidence, and testimony that painted Joel Guy Jr. as a cold-blooded killer, motivated entirely by greed. In October 2020, he was convicted on all counts, including 2 counts of first-degree murder, and sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. As of January 2026, Joel Guy Jr. is incarcerated in Tennessee. He has served approximately 9 years and will never be released. Case 3. Tyler Hadley, July 16, 2011. Port St. Lucie, Florida. 17-year-old Tyler Hadley was planning a party. He'd been posting about it on Facebook all day, telling friends his parents were out of town and everyone should come over. But Tyler's parents weren't out of town. They were in the master bedroom, dead. Hours earlier, Tyler had walked into the living room where his parents, Blake and Mary Jo, were relaxing. He was carrying a hammer. He attacked his father first, striking him repeatedly in the head. When Mary Jo tried to run, Tyler chased her down and killed her the same way. Then he dragged both bodies into the master bedroom, locked the door, and piled furniture and household items against it to hide the blood. He took a shower, changed clothes, and started his party. Around 60 teenagers showed up that night. Music blasted. Kids drank and laughed. Tyler seemed like the perfect host, moving through the crowd with a strange, manic energy. But as the night wore on, he pulled aside a friend named Michael Mendel. Tyler wanted to tell someone what he'd done. He led Michael to the hallway outside his parents' bedroom and whispered that his parents were dead inside. Michael didn't believe him at first. Then Tyler opened the door slightly, and Michael saw the bodies. And horrified, Michael left the party and went home. The next morning, tormented by what he'd seen, he went to the police. Officers arrived at the Hadley home and arrested Tyler. He confessed immediately, showing little emotion. At trial, Tyler's defense argued he suffered from mental health issues and had been struggling with his parents' strict rules. The prosecution countered that the party afterward showed consciousness of guilt and a lack of remorse. In 2014, Tyler was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. But in December 2018, following a Supreme Court ruling on juvenile sentencing, Tyler was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole after 25 years. As of January 2026, Tyler Hadley remains incarcerated at Gulf Correctional Institution in Florida, and he has served nearly 15 years and will be eligible for parole in 2036, when he'll be 42 years old. Case 4. Lyle and Eric Menendez, August 20th, 1989, Beverly Hills, California. The Menendez family seemed to have it all: wealth, success, a beautiful home. Jose Menendez was a powerful entertainment executive. His wife Kitty was a former beauty queen. Their sons, Lyle and Eric, had every advantage money could buy, but behind closed doors, the brothers would later claim something dark was happening. On that August night, Lyle, 21, and Eric, 18, armed themselves with shotguns. They walked into the den where their parents were watching television and opened fire. Jose was shot point blank in the back of the head. Kitty tried to crawl away, but the brothers reloaded and shot her multiple times as she begged for her life. They fired over a dozen rounds total. After the murders, the brothers drove away to dispose of the weapons, then returned home and called 911, claiming they'd discovered their parents dead after coming back from a movie. For months, Lyle and Eric lived lavishly, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on cars, watches, clothes, and trips. But Eric was falling apart emotionally. He confessed to his psychologist, Dr. Jerome Oziel, during therapy sessions. When Oziel's girlfriend told police about the confession, the brothers were arrested in March 1990. At their first trial in 1993, the brothers shocked the courtroom by admitting to the murders but claiming they acted in self-defense. They testified that Jose had sexually abused them for years and that Kitty knew but did nothing, as they said they killed their parents because they feared for their lives. The defense presented family members and experts who supported their abuse claims. The prosecution argued it was all about money and that the brothers were manipulative liars. The first trial ended in hung juries. The juries couldn't agree whether it was murder or manslaughter. At their second trial in 1995, the judge limited the abuse testimony. This time, both brothers were convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. As of January 2026, the Menendez brothers have served over 36 years. They are incarcerated at Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility in San Diego, housed in the same unit after years apart. Recent developments include renewed interest in their case due to documentaries highlighting the abuse allegations, and in late 2024, the Los Angeles District Attorney recommended resentencing. Their case remains under review, but both brothers remain imprisoned with no release date set. Case 5, the Bever Brothers, July 22, 2015, Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. The Bever family lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Robert, 18, and Michael, 16, were the eldest of 7 children. They were quiet, homeschooled, and kept to themselves. But Robert had a dark obsession. He was fascinated by mass murders and violent video games. He wanted to become famous by outdoing historical killers. He shared this twisted dream with his younger brother Michael, and together they planned something unthinkable. That night, armed with knives, the brothers methodically moved through their home, killing their family members one by one. Their father, David, 54, was attacked first, and then their mother, April, 45. Then their younger siblings, Daniel, 12, Christopher, 7, and Victoria, 5. Each victim suffered multiple stab wounds. The attack was brutal and prolonged. As the brothers moved through the house, 12-year-old Daniel managed to call 911. On the call, which was played at trial, Daniel's desperate voice can be heard. "Please help. My brother's attacking my family." Then the line went chaotic with screaming. Daniel was killed during that call while trying to save his family. 2 sisters survived, Crystal, 13, and Autumn, 2. Crystal pretended to be dead after being stabbed multiple times and later escaped through a window to alert neighbors. Her survival and testimony would be crucial in convicting her brothers. When police arrived, they found a scene of unimaginable horror, and the brothers had planned to flee to Washington State and commit a mass shooting to add to their body count. But Crystal's escape had stopped them. At trial, prosecutors revealed the brothers' detailed plans found in notebooks and on their computer. Robert showed no remorse smirking during testimony. Michael appeared more withdrawn but offered no explanation for why he participated. Robert Bever was convicted of 5 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. Michael, who was 16 at the time, accepted a plea deal and testified against his brother. He was sentenced to 5 consecutive life sentences, but with the possibility of parole. As of January 2026, Robert Bever is incarcerated at Oklahoma State Penitentiary, serving life without parole. He has served over 10 years and will die in prison. Michael Bever is serving his sentence at a separate facility and will be eligible for parole consideration after serving 25 years, potentially around 2040. If these stories are making you realize how important it is to recognize warning signs in troubled youth, whether it's isolation, violent obsessions, or untreated mental illness, hit that like button and share this video. These families never saw it coming. Let's make sure we're paying attention before it's too late. Case 6. Suzane von Richthofen, October 31, 2002, São Paulo, Brazil. Suzane von Richthofen was born into privilege. Her father, Manfred, was a successful engineer, and her mother, Maricia, was a psychiatrist. But Suzane fell in love with Daniel Cravinhos, a mechanic from a modest background. Her parents disapproved intensely, creating a rift in the family. Suzane, only 18, felt trapped between her parents' expectations and her relationship. She made a choice that would destroy multiple families. On Halloween night 2002, Suzane invited Daniel and his brother Christian to her family's home under the pretense of a gathering. Once inside, the Cravinhos brothers attacked. They bludgeoned Manfred and Maricia to death with blunt objects while Suzane watched. After the murders, Suzane helped stage the scene to look like a robbery gone wrong. She went to a motel with Daniel, establishing an alibi. The next day, she returned home and discovered her parents' bodies, playing the role of devastated daughter. But investigators quickly found inconsistencies. The staged robbery looked wrong. Valuable items were left behind in obvious places. Neighbors reported seeing Suzane leave with 2 men the night before. 8 phone records linked her to Daniel. Under interrogation, the brothers confessed and implicated Suzane. The case became a sensation in Brazil, dominating headlines for years. The media dubbed it the case of the century. Suzane came from wealth and privilege. Why would she orchestrate her parents' murder? At trial, prosecutors painted her as a manipulative young woman who wanted her inheritance and freedom from parental control. The defense argued she was manipulated by Daniel, that she loved him and was psychologically vulnerable. The jury didn't buy it. On July 22, 2006, Suzane was convicted and sentenced to 39 years and 6 months in prison. Under Brazilian law, the maximum sentence anyone can serve is 30 years, so her sentence was reduced. She served approximately 16 years before being released on parole on January 11, 2023. Following her release, Suzane changed her name to Suzane Lice Magalhães Muniz. She began a new life, entering a relationship with Felipe Zucati Muniz, a local doctor, and they have a child together. As of January 2026, Suzane is living freely in Brazil under her new identity. She's 41 years old. Daniel and Christian Cravinhos also served their sentences and have been released, though they maintain lower profiles than Suzane, whose case continues to fascinate and outrage the Brazilian public. Case 7. Sarah Marie Johnson, September 2, 2003, Bellevue, Idaho. 16-year-old Sarah Marie Johnson was furious with her parents. Alan and Diane Johnson disapproved of her relationship with 19-year-old Bruno Santos, and they'd forbidden her from seeing him. For most teenagers, this would mean sneaking around and dealing with groundings. For Sarah, it meant murder. On the morning of September 2nd, Sarah retrieved a .264 caliber rifle from the guest house on their property. She first went to her parents' bedroom, where her mother Diane was still sleeping. Sarah shot her once in the head at close range. Then she walked to the bathroom where her father Alan was showering. She fired twice, hitting him in the chest. Both parents died quickly. Sarah then drove to school as if nothing had happened. When she returned home that afternoon, she called 911, claiming she discovered her parents dead. She told investigators that someone must have broken in while she was at school. But the evidence told a different story. Sarah had a fresh injury on her hand, consistent with rifle recoil. Gunshot residue was found on her clothing and hands. Her fingerprints were on the rifle. Most damning was the timeline. Forensic evidence showed the murders occurred in the morning when only Sarah was home, not during school hours as she claimed. The motive was clear. Sarah wanted to be with Bruno without her parents' interference. In interviews with friends, she talked about how much she hated her parents and wished they were dead. She'd even researched ways to kill someone and make it look like an accident. At trial in March 2005, Sarah's defense argued she was a troubled teenager who'd been framed, or that the evidence was circumstantial. The prosecution presented overwhelming forensic evidence and testimony from Sarah's friends about her statements before the murders. The jury deliberated for 12 hours before finding Sarah Marie Johnson guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, or she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, one of the harshest sentences given to a juvenile in Idaho history. As of January 2026, Sarah Marie Johnson has been incarcerated for over 22 years. She is currently 38 years old and housed at the Pocatello Women's Correctional Center in Idaho. She has repeatedly appealed her conviction and sentence, arguing that sentencing a 16-year-old to life without parole is unconstitutional, but her appeals have been denied. She will spend the rest of her life in prison. Case 8. Thomas Bart Whitaker, December 10th, 2003, Sugar Land, Texas. The Whitaker family was celebrating. Bart Whitaker had supposedly just graduated from Sam Houston State University, and his parents, Kent and Tricia, along with his younger brother Kevin, were taking him out to dinner to mark the achievement. And it was all a lie. Bart hadn't been enrolled in college for months. But the celebration wasn't the only deception. Bart had orchestrated something far darker. When the family returned home that evening, they were ambushed. One of Bart's accomplices, Chris Brashear, was waiting inside with a gun. He shot Tricia in the chest, killing her. He shot Kevin in the chest, killing him too. He shot Kent, but the bullet missed vital organs. Then Brashear shot Bart in the arm, a superficial wound designed to make Bart look like a victim rather than the mastermind. Kent survived and believed his oldest son had also narrowly escaped death. Police initially investigated the incident as a home invasion or robbery gone wrong. But as they dug deeper, inconsistencies emerged. Why was nothing stolen? Why was Bart's wound so minor compared to the others? Why did forensic evidence suggest Bart knew the attack was coming? The investigation took years, but eventually authorities uncovered the truth. Bart had hired two men, Chris Brashear and Stephen Champagne, to murder his family. The motive was financial. Bart wanted to inherit the family estate. This wasn't even his first attempt. In 2001, Bart had planned a similar ambush, but his accomplices backed out at the last minute. In 2007, after fleeing to Mexico and being extradited back to Texas, Bart Whitaker was convicted of capital murder. He was sentenced to death. But then something extraordinary happened. Kent Whitaker, who had survived the attack and lost his wife and younger son, began a campaign to save Bart's life. He forgave his son publicly and pleaded with Texas Governor Greg Abbott to commute the death sentence. On February 22nd, 2018, just 40 minutes before Bart's scheduled execution at 6 p.m., Governor Abbott granted clemency. Bart's sentence was commuted to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As of January 2026, Thomas Bart Whitaker is incarcerated at the William P. Clements Jr. unit in Amarillo, Texas. He has served over 22 years. His father Kent continues to visit him regularly and has written a book about forgiveness. Bart has expressed remorse for his actions and has become a writer and advocate for prison reform, though he will never be released. He's 45 years old. Case 9. Dana James Ewell, April 19th, 1992, Fresno, California. The Ewell family home became a crime scene that looked like a burglary gone wrong. Dale Ewell, a successful aviation executive, his wife Glee, and their daughter Tiffany were found shot to death, where drawers were pulled open, valuables scattered. But investigators noticed something odd. Nothing of real value was missing. And Dana Ewell, the 21-year-old son who'd been away at Santa Clara University at the time, seemed strangely composed for someone who just lost his entire family. Dana was living what appeared to be a charmed life at college, expensive cars, designer clothes, lavish parties. But behind the facade, he was drowning in debt and resentment. His parents' estate plan restricted his inheritance until he was in his 30s, when he'd presumably be mature enough then to handle the estimated $7 to $8 million fortune. Dana couldn't wait that long. He wanted the money now, and he wanted the lifestyle he felt entitled to. So Dana recruited Joel Radovich, an acquaintance known for his willingness to do anything for the right price, when together they planned the murders down to the smallest detail. On Easter Sunday, while Dana was at his girlfriend's family's house, establishing an alibi, Radovich drove to the Ewell home and executed the plan. He shot Dale, Glee, and Tiffany, then staged a burglary to throw off investigators. But Dana made critical mistakes. He was too eager about the money, immediately asking about accessing the estate. He was too calm about the deaths, showing little genuine grief. He bought expensive items and planned elaborate vacations while the investigation was ongoing. Detectives began watching Dana closely. They discovered he'd purchased books about murder and getting away with it. They found suspicious calls between Dana and Radovich. They uncovered Dana's mounting debts and his obsession with wealth. The investigation took years. It wasn't until 1995 that authorities had enough evidence to arrest both men. The case was entirely circumstantial. No murder weapon was found. No eyewitnesses came forward. But the web of evidence was overwhelming. At trial, the prosecution painted Dana as a cold, calculating killer who valued money more than family. In 1998, Dana James Ewell was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder and conspiracy. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Joel Radovich received the same sentence. As of January 2026, Dana Ewell remains incarcerated at California State Prison Corcoran in the Protective Housing Unit. He's 55 years old and has served 34 years. He maintains his innocence and has filed numerous appeals, all denied. He will die in prison. Case 10. Kipland Kinkle. May 20th, 1998. Springfield, Oregon. 15-year-old Kip Kinkle had just been suspended from Thurston High School for bringing a stolen gun to campus. His parents, William and Faith, both respected educators in the community, were mortified and disappointed. They'd tried everything to help their troubled son, therapy, medication, support, but Kip was spiraling. That afternoon, Kip made a decision. He shot his father in the back of the head while Bill sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee. Kip covered his father's body with a sheet and waited. When his mother Faith came home from her teaching job hours later, Kip shot her 5 times, in the back, head, and face as she entered through the garage. He covered her body with a sheet too, and spent the night alone in the house with his dead parents. Your audio recordings Kip made that night reveal his mental state. He was crying, talking to himself, acknowledging that what he'd done was wrong, but feeling unable to stop what was coming next. The next morning, May 21st, Kip loaded his father's guns into his mother's car and drove to Thurston High School. He walked into the cafeteria at 8 a.m. and opened fire. Students screamed and scattered. Ben Walker and Mikkel Nicolaisen were killed. 25 others were wounded in the chaos. Kip was firing methodically, reloading and continuing until several students, including wrestler Jake Riker, tackled him to the ground. When police searched the Kinkle home, they found a horrifying scene. His parents' bodies, homemade bombs, ammunition stockpiled throughout the house, and manifestos revealing Kip's disturbed thoughts. And he'd been hearing voices commanding him to kill for months. At trial, the defense argued Kip suffered from paranoid schizophrenia and had been experiencing auditory hallucinations that drove him to commit the murders. Psychiatric experts testified about his deteriorating mental state, but the prosecution maintained that Kip knew right from wrong, the planning, the cover-up, and his actions all demonstrated consciousness of guilt. In November 1999, Kip Kinkle pleaded guilty to 4 counts of murder and 26 counts of attempted murder. He was sentenced to 111 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge noted that while Kip's mental illness was a factor, the severity and premeditation of his crimes warranted the harshest sentence available. As of January 2026, Kipland Kinkle is incarcerated at the Oregon State Correctional Institution in Salem. He's 43 years old and has served 27 years. His earliest possible release date would be in January 2011, when he'd be 127 years old, effectively a life sentence. Kip has expressed remorse in prison and has participated in mental health treatment, but he will never be released. Case 11. Nicole Kasinskas, May 2002, Nashua, New Hampshire. 17-year-old Nicole Kasinskas was living what she described as a life of hell at home. She felt controlled, suffocated, and desperate to escape. Then she met Billy Sullivan, 18, through online instant messaging. Their relationship intensified quickly, and together they hatched a plan. If Nicole's mother Jean was gone, they could be together without interference. On the night of July 5th, 2003, Nicole let Billy into her home while her mother slept. The plan was simple and brutal. Billy, with Nicole's assistance, entered Jean's bedroom carrying a sledgehammer. Jean never woke up. He struck her repeatedly in the head with the sledgehammer, killing her in her bed. Nicole helped clean up the scene and dispose of evidence. They staged it to look like a burglary, then fled together. But their freedom was short-lived. Neighbors reported seeing suspicious activity at the Kasinskas home. When police investigated and discovered Jean's body, they quickly identified Nicole and Billy as suspects. Phone records and witness statements placed them together that night. Under questioning, both eventually confessed. The details of the murder were horrifying. The level of violence, the premeditation, and Nicole's active participation, despite being the victim's daughter. At trial, prosecutors argued that Nicole was a willing participant who wanted her mother dead to gain freedom and be with her boyfriend. The defense claimed Nicole was manipulated by Billy, that she was young and vulnerable and under his control. They emphasized her difficult home life and suggested she'd been psychologically abused. In 2004, Nicole Kasinskas was convicted of first-degree murder. Because she was 17 at the time of the crime, she received a sentence of life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Billy Sullivan received a similar sentence. The case became a cautionary tale about online relationships and teenage violence. Nicole spent over 2 decades in prison, during which she participated in educational programs, therapy, and rehabilitation efforts. She expressed remorse for her actions and took responsibility for her role in her mother's death. In October 2025, after serving 22 years, Nicole Kasinskas was released on parole. The parole board determined she'd been sufficiently rehabilitated and posed no threat to society. As of January 2026, Nicole is living under supervised parole conditions somewhere in New Hampshire. She's 40 years old and living under strict conditions, including regular check-ins with her parole officer and restrictions on her movements. Billy Sullivan remains incarcerated, with his own parole hearing scheduled for 2028. Case 12. Ronald DeFeo Jr. November 13th, 1974. Amityville, New York. The DeFeo family lived at 112 Ocean Avenue, a large Dutch colonial house that would later become infamous. 23-year-old Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr. was the eldest of 5 children. He had a troubled relationship with his father, Ronald Sr., marked by arguments about money, drugs, and Butch's future. Around 3:15 a.m. that night, Butch moved through the house with a .35 caliber rifle. One by one, he shot his family as they slept. His father, Ronald Sr., 43, his mother, Louise, 42, his brothers, Mark, 12, and John, 9, his sisters, Dawn, 18, and Allison, 13. Each victim was shot while lying face down in bed. The entire family was wiped out in less than 15 minutes. Later that evening, Butch ran into a bar in Amityville, shouting that someone had killed his family. He led police and friends back to the house, where they discovered the horrific scene. Initially, Butch claimed the murders were committed by a mob hitman named Louis Fellini, but inconsistencies in his story quickly emerged. There were no signs of forced entry. The family dog hadn't barked. Neighbors heard no gunshots, despite the rifle's loud report. Under interrogation, Butch confessed. He claimed voices in his head had commanded him to kill his family, that he'd been hearing these voices for months. His defense at trial centered on an insanity plea, that Butch was so mentally ill he couldn't be held responsible for his actions. But the prosecution presented evidence of premeditation. Butch had researched the house's layout, he'd collected the rifle beforehand, and after the murders he'd showered, changed clothes, and disposed of evidence before going to the bar. On November 21, 1975, Ronald DeFeo Jr. was found guilty on 6 counts of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 6 consecutive sentences of 25 years to life in prison, 150 years total. The house at 112 Ocean Avenue would later become famous as the Amityville Horror House after the Lutz family moved in and claimed to experience paranormal activity, though most experts believe their story was fabricated. DeFeo spent the rest of his life in prison, becoming one of New York's longest-serving inmates. He gave numerous interviews over the decades, changing his story multiple times, sometimes claiming insanity, other times blaming his sister Dawn, and occasionally admitting full responsibility. Ronald DeFeo Jr. died on March 12, 2021, at the Albany Medical Center. He was 69 years old and had served 47 years in prison. The official cause of death was not publicly released, though he'd been in declining health. He died never having shown genuine remorse for murdering his entire family. Case 13. Adam Lanza, December 14, 2012, Newtown, Connecticut. 20-year-old Adam Lanza lived with his mother Nancy in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Nancy was a former stockbroker who dedicated her life to caring for Adam, who had been diagnosed with sensory processing disorder and Asperger's syndrome. She homeschooled him, managed his routines, and tried desperately to connect with her increasingly isolated son. Nancy had an interest in firearms and owned several guns, which she used for target shooting. She'd taken Adam to shooting ranges, hoping it would be an activity they could share. That decision would have catastrophic consequences. In the early morning hours of December 14th, Adam shot his mother 4 times in the head as she slept in her bed. He was wearing black clothing and a military-style vest. After killing Nancy, Adam took several of her firearms, including a Bushmaster AR-15 rifle, and drove to Sandy Hook Elementary School, where he'd once been a student. At 9:35 a.m., Adam shot his way through the locked school entrance and began his rampage. He moved through the hallways, firing rapidly. He entered 2 first-grade classrooms and opened fire on children and teachers. The victims were predominantly 6 and 7 years old. 20 children were killed. 6 educators who tried to protect their students were also killed. Teachers hid children in closets and bathrooms. The entire attack lasted less than 5 minutes. When police arrived and closed in, Adam turned the gun on himself, firing a single shot to the head. The investigation into why Adam committed such an atrocity revealed a deeply troubled young man who'd become obsessed with mass shootings. His computer contained detailed research on previous school shootings, particularly Columbine. He'd created spreadsheets documenting mass murders throughout history. He was isolated, spending most of his time alone in his room with the windows covered. He communicated with his mother primarily through email, even though they lived in the same house. Despite extensive investigation, no clear motive was ever established. Adam left no manifesto, no suicide note, no explanation. Theories ranged from his mental health struggles to his obsession with mass violence to possible resentment toward his mother or the school. The FBI concluded that Adam's motive may never be fully understood. The Sandy Hook shooting became one of the deadliest mass shootings in American history and sparked intense national debate about gun control, mental health care, and school safety. As of January 2026, the questions still remain about what drove Adam Lanza to commit such unspeakable violence. He was 20 years old when he died by his own hand. His victims, 20 children and 7 adults, including his mother, never got to see their futures. Case 14, Henry Chow, March 1st, 2013. Tai Kok Tsui, Hong Kong. 29-year-old Henry Chow invited his parents to his apartment for what they believed would be a family meal. His parents had been supporting him financially despite his gambling addiction and mounting debts. They'd recently told Henry they would be cutting off financial support, insisting he needed to become self-sufficient. Henry couldn't accept that. When his parents arrived at his apartment, Henry served them dinner. After the meal, he attacked them with a hammer, striking both repeatedly until they were unconscious. Then he used a knife to ensure they were dead, stabbing them multiple times. But Henry didn't stop there. Over the next several hours, he dismembered both bodies in his bathroom. He stored body parts in his refrigerator alongside food items. Other remains were placed in plastic containers. Some parts he disposed of in various locations around Hong Kong. He kept his parents' torsos in the fridge, wrapped in plastic bags. For days, Henry went about his life as if nothing had happened. He continued gambling, using money he'd stolen from his parents before killing them. He ordered takeout food and storing it next to his parents' remains in the refrigerator. But when his parents failed to show up for work and couldn't be reached by phone, family members grew concerned. They reported the couple missing to police. Investigators traced their last known location to Henry's apartment. When officers arrived to question Henry, they noticed a strong odor coming from inside. They obtained a search warrant and discovered the horrific scene. Human remains in the refrigerator, blood evidence in the bathroom, and signs of dismemberment throughout the apartment. Henry was arrested immediately. During interrogation, he confessed to the murders. At trial, prosecutors revealed that Henry had been planning the murders for at least 6 months. He'd researched methods of killing and body disposal. He'd purchased the tools he would need, and the motive was purely financial. Henry was drowning in gambling debts, and his parents' decision to cut off funding meant he would lose access to money he felt entitled to. He believed that by killing them, he could inherit their assets and continue his lifestyle. The defense attempted to argue diminished responsibility due to his gambling addiction, but the premeditation and brutality of the crime undermined this defense. The jury found Henry Chow guilty of 2 counts of murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, the mandatory sentence for murder in Hong Kong. As of January 2026, Henry Chow has served approximately 13 years of his life sentence. He is incarcerated at a Hong Kong correctional facility. Under Hong Kong law, life imprisonment typically means a minimum of 20 years before parole consideration, and though particularly heinous crimes can result in longer minimum terms. Henry's case shocked Hong Kong society and sparked discussions about gambling addiction and family dynamics. Case 15, David Kozak, December 21st, 2023, Prague, Czech Republic. 24-year-old David Kozak was a history student at Charles University's Faculty of Arts. He came from a middle-class family and had no obvious warning signs of violence. David harbored dark obsessions and violent fantasies that he'd kept hidden for years. On the afternoon of December 21st, David went to his family home in Hostun, a village about 50 kilometers from Prague. There, he shot and killed his father. The motive for this murder remains unclear, though investigators believe it may have been to eliminate someone who might have stopped his next planned attack. After killing his father, David drove to Prague. He arrived at the Faculty of Arts building at Charles University around 2 p.m., heavily armed with multiple firearms and hundreds of rounds of ammunition. He made his way to the upper floors of the building and began shooting. Students and faculty scrambled for cover, barricading themselves in classrooms and offices. Others jumped from windows to escape. David moved through the building methodically, firing at anyone he encountered. The attack lasted approximately 20 minutes before police arrived and engaged him. When officers closed in, David retreated to a balcony and shot himself in the head. The final death toll was staggering: 14 people killed and 22 wounded, making it the deadliest mass shooting in Czech history. As investigators pieced together David's background, which they made a horrifying discovery. 6 days earlier, on December 15th, David had murdered a young father and his 2-month-old daughter in Klanovich Forest, about 25 kilometers from Prague. The family had been out for a walk when David ambushed and shot them. This double murder had been under investigation, but police hadn't connected it to David. In a suicide note found after the university shooting, David confessed to the forest killings. He wrote that he'd committed those murders as a test run for his larger planned attack. He expressed a desire for revenge against society, though he didn't articulate specific grievances. He mentioned being inspired by other mass shooters and wanting to make his mark. Investigators found evidence on David's computer showing he'd researched previous school shootings extensively and had been planning his attack for months. He'd legally purchased the firearms he used and had practiced shooting at ranges. As of January 2026, the Czech Republic is still grappling with the aftermath of David Kozak's rampage. The shooting led to nationwide discussions about gun control laws and mental health resources. Memorial services continue to be held for the victims. David Kozak died by suicide on December 21st, 2023, at age 24, leaving behind 17 victims across 3 separate incidents and a nation searching for answers about how such violence could occur in their peaceful country. A few are dead by their own hands or the hands of law enforcement, but the families they destroyed can never be put back together. The parents who raised them, loved them, and tried to guide them are gone forever. These families never saw it coming. Let's make sure we're watching closer. Share this video, start conversations, and remember, sometimes the most dangerous person is the one closest to you. We'll see you in the next one.